Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Eli Capilouto, President of the University of Kentucky. It is my delight to welcome you. And before we get started, I would like to thank the Acousticats for their delightful performance. I'm violating one of my presidential rules, which is never follow the Acousticats. But anyway, welcome to Kincaid Auditorium and the Gatton College of Business and Economics. I want to point out, while it is the College of Business and Economics, it's used by 6 colleges and used for special events. I will point out that it's the first 100% philanthropically supported building on our campus. That is a shameless solicitation for our College of Law, which we'll break ground on in a few weeks. But thank you. Thank you for the support. And I'd like to welcome you as we celebrate together the ways in which John G. Heyburn II Initiative for Excellence in the Federal Judiciary is enhancing and extending the University of Kentucky's capacity as a place of knowledge, discourse, and service. This is the first judicial conference and speaker series of its name, and what a powerful way to begin. The Heyburn Initiative, more than simply a center and place for historical records, has a living purpose: to serve, to build, understanding, and to better the judicial system of the United States. It aligns with the Commonwealth of Kentucky's tradition of contributing extraordinary public servants to the nation, especially in the judiciary. Though small in population, we've given to the country Henry Clay, 4 vice presidents, President Lincoln, First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln, and several Supreme Court justices and federal judges. And for more than a century, the UK College of Law has prepared many of our Commonwealth and nation's public servants. Each of those individuals committed to upholding the doctrine and ethics of their profession, exploring the role of law in our society, and serving in the public's best interest. I am continually touched and moved by the work of our alumni and the programs supported by the College of Law. It is a hallmark on our campus that for the last 30 years has brought forward many of the foremost legal scholars and leaders to the University of Kentucky campus to discuss legal topics of current interest. Just a few of our guests: Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas, Elena Kagan, and Samuel Alito. Justice Albie Sachs of the South African Constitutional Court, someone who I particularly enjoyed, Yale Law School Dean Robert Post, and the Honorable Abner J. Mikva. Today, we add several notable names. It is a most sincere honor to welcome, on behalf of the University of Kentucky, the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, to our campus, as well as many other honorable scholars, jurists, and legal minds that will lead the discussions, presentations, and conversations today. And of course, this was made possible through the life, work, and memory of Judge John G. Heyburn II. His legacy, one of education, understanding, and continuing development of the judicial system, brings us together today. On the day we first announced the Heyburn Initiative, I noted that we were lighting an eternal flame of knowledge in honor of character, wisdom, and service. It is my pleasure to introduce the individual who ignited that flame and works each day to preserve its radiance, Dr. Martha Heyburn. Dr. Heyburn I am inspired by your vision, your love for your husband and family, and your determination to share everything he stood for. And I know I speak for the University of Kentucky family when I say thank you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Martha Habron.
Thank you, Dr. Capilouto, for your kind remarks. Undeserved, but very appreciated. We have had a wonderful cooperative partnership together, bringing this initiative to life in a very short time. And it's a thrill and an honor to look out and see everyone here today. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the John G. Habron II Initiative for Excellence in the Federal Judiciary. It's a national, nonpartisan resource located in Kentucky for the benefit of the federal judiciary, lawyers, law students, scholars, citizens, and youth. The nation has not, in recent memory, had a clearer understanding of the impact of the federal judiciary on our daily lives, not a better understanding of how the Senate and executive branches shape the federal judiciary, and we, as citizens, shape them. This is a core mission of the Habron Initiative, to understand the relationships of the three branches of government, currently and historically. And what a day to begin to understand that. The Habron Initiative, in fact, has several missions: to provide ongoing high-caliber programs and speakers to discuss issues of seminal importance to our nation's judiciary and therefore to us, to become the repository for the archives and oral histories of Kentuckians who serve or will serve from the third branch at any of the three levels, and to develop oral histories to contextualize these individuals and their significant opinions, as well as the third branch of government itself and how it relates to the other two branches. It's also distinguished by an emphasis on personal interaction with the students. Today is our inaugural program, as President Capilouto mentioned. So first of all, I too must thank John Habron for his infectious passion for you and for me, for his life and his work. He had a passion for the rule of law. He rose to leadership because he wanted to, and I quote him, ever improve the legal system considered the envy of the world. He taught his law clerks that his opinions, while mandates, are part of a continuing conversation. With entities such as the AO and FJC bringing ongoing programming, we're a platform in perpetuity to further these core beliefs. And we're here today to see that work continue. I'm proud and honored to have all three branches of the third branch, all three levels of the third branch here with us today. The Chief Justice of the United States, the Honorable John Roberts, the Chief Judge of the 5th District, the Honorable Carl Stewart, the other members of our own 6th Circuit who are in attendance today, United States District Court judges and senior judges of both the Eastern and Western districts and other districts. Jeremy, where are you? Thank you. Bankruptcy and magistrate judges. Would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Thank you. The Habron Initiative grew out of the cooperative vision and efforts of many of these judges and other judges and friends from around the country. Russell Coleman, Eric Olson, a former law clerk, Leo Corbett, a college roommate and Harvard Business School trustee, our sons, Will and Jack, and the executive directors of the administrative offices of the court and of the Federal Judicial Center, Jim Duff and Judge Jeremy Fogel, who offered guidance and embraced our core concepts. This initiative could be at any university in the country, but for the people of vision and extraordinary skill here at our own UK, I am speaking of President Capilouto, a man who has transformed UK and has embraced this effort even while nascent. I'm speaking of Dean Brennan, who was instrumental in creating a partnership that will ensure the vision, mission, and goals of the Hayburn Initiative will find expression, grow, and improve for years to come. Dean Birdwhistle and Assistant Dean Skaggs, who saw the potential to build a treasure trove of judicial materials that will draw scholars from around our nation and make our state, this university, and the initiative the envy of others. I'd like to recognize Professor Brandwine as illustrative of the importance of our professors and scholars in making the initiative programs richer and deeper. Many of the judges and individuals mentioned are charged with preserving and developing the vision and missions of the Hayburn Initiative. So could I please ask the members of the advisory board to stand along with Russell Coleman. Thank you. Perhaps no single person has had the impact on the formation of the Hayburn Initiative as has our own Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. As a dear friend to John and me for over 40 years, who believed in the idea, perhaps even in me, long before the initiative became fully structured and defined, Senator McConnell provided personal guidance, direction, and nonpartisan support. And perhaps, most importantly to all of you gathered here today, it is Senator McConnell who invited Chief Justice Roberts to speak at our inaugural event. While he could not be here today, please join me in thanking the leader for the formative guidance and support and issuing the invitation to the Chief Justice of our United States. I'd also like to recognize many of the current and former law clerks of Judge Hayburn and the other judges and justices that are here today. Would you please stand and remain standing? Got some out there. Thank you. You know how proud your judges are of you, right? Throughout your life. It's a relationship that never changes. Oh, but please stay standing just a moment. Because I'd also like to recognize the current law students at our flagship College of Law and the faculty and dean. And could you please join the law clerks and stand? And if you could stay standing, I'd like you to also know that we have 5 pre-law students from each from 6 Kentucky colleges and their deans here today as well. And I would be grateful if you would stand and be recognized, please. Where are you? And finally, would our representatives of middle and high school, Tommy Schrepperman, Owen and Adam Meluish of Louisville, and Caroline Hayburn of Maine, please join the group standing to represent the face of the future. Thank you. The Hayburn Initiative, visually, as you can see, exists for all our citizens and youth, as well as all our judges. They will be able to digitally access the transcriptions of all of our judicial archives, the oral histories, the presentations, such as we have permission to tape in some portion today. We hope that our young people will access these materials and one day say, this could be me. John Hayburn was inspired by anyone seeking to improve themselves. He was inspired when we were impassioned. We will strive to continue the spirit of John Hayburn in all our efforts, his unique combination of a genuine kind spirit in a humble man, of brilliance, determination, and humor. How many of us remember an opportunity for personal interaction with a person we admired that we'll either never forget or that actually caused us to see our lives differently, to be inspired in a certain direction or change paths? We're grateful to the Chief Justice of the United States to have agreed to participate in a personal small group session, which he's doing as we speak, with 25 of our law students that were selected by lottery. In addition, we're grateful to our other program leaders and judges who are fanning out into the law school classrooms this afternoon to engage with the law students in a personal way. The John G. Heyburn Initiative for Excellence in the Federal Judiciary exists today to provide a platform in perpetuity for the judiciary to ever improve. On behalf of the advisory board and our family, we're thrilled to honor his memory and the esteemed Honorable Chief Justice and an inaugural event that will lay a strong foundation for the future of the Heyburn Initiative. Thank you so much for coming today and making this inaugural event a success. Take a moment and reflect on the people in your life who've made you better or stronger. The people whose friendship and support have improved your life, or perhaps you, theirs. Perhaps they're beside you. I certainly see many such people in the room today, such as this, new friends and old. One such person for John and me is the Reverend Robin Jennings, our friend of over 35 years, and the minister at St. Francis in the Fields Episcopal Church throughout that time, until his recent retirement. The man who baptized both of our sons here today, with whom I taught for some 7 years, and with whom I wrote a collection of his sermons in a reflective journaling format. Author, teacher, encourager, pastoral priest. Together with his wife, Mary, their family has shown us family life and love. That in St. Paul's words, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. In the spirit of love and friendship, it's my distinct honor and privilege to recognize the Reverend Robin Jennings to open the Heyburn Initiative in prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we turn our attention to you in prayer, not with more of our words, but seeking only your word. Help us, we pray, to be still and to know that you are God, so that in this stillness we may hear your voice, like the prophet Elijah, who recognized you not in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the sound of that still, small voice, which gave guidance for your people and the promise of a new day. It was Moses who climbed the hills of that mountain with a sense of justice, and who received your law at Sinai, which gave shape and character to a people who were identified and who were given life by these very commands. It was Father Abraham who, through submission to you, received a covenant, a binding agreement, and a future that was more plentiful, with descendants than stars in the sky. As we sit today in the stillness and ponder the meaning of leadership and of excellence, may we hear again your word, that if anyone wants to become great among you, he must first of all be your servant. John Heyburn heard these words, and he received your grace that formed his character and gave him courage, that was witnessed not only before many in the courtroom, but there in the silence, before you alone in a hospital room. We gather now, seeking your blessing upon this Hayburn initiative, knowing that you are the one who initiates. And we humbly ask that you grant unto Chief Justice Roberts and to the courts and to the magistrates of this land a spirit of wisdom, understanding, that they may discern the truth and impartially administer the law under your judgment, as they listen now in their day for your word, and as they offer their lives to your glory and to the welfare of your people. For it is in your most holy name we pray and we offer you this word of prayer. Amen.
Thank you, Robin. UK has a nationally renowned scholar, historian, and oral historian as dean of its libraries, who for over 4 decades has served as associate dean for special collections, digital programs, university archivist, and founding director of the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History. He has personally conducted over 900 oral histories, mostly regarding the history and culture of Kentucky. He has drawn a talented staff and built a program of depth and breadth unmatched by any in the region and few in the nation. So it's no wonder that we found an ideal match in UK for the Hayburn Initiative with Dean Terry Birdwhistle and his vision. We could not have located the Hayburn Initiative here on Kentucky soil at our flagship institution and its College of Law that was a source of such pride and the wellspring of inspiration for my husband without Dean Birdwhistle's leadership and all the talent and skill he's drawn to UK. Please welcome our Dean of Libraries, accomplished author and historian, Dr. Terry Birdwhistle.
Wow, could listen to that all day. Thank you, Dr. Hayburn. That's so nice of you. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm truly honored just to be a part of this program today. All of this began with a conversation many months ago between Martha and Deirdre Skaggs, our Associate Dean for Special Collections in the UK Libraries. And it has been our distinct pleasure and privilege to work with Martha and her sons, Will and Jack, over the past year to make this significant initiative come to where we are today. And so many other people have done so much to make this day possible, and it was, Martha, you did a great job of thanking all those people, and there's so many out there that have helped us, including President Capilouto, our UK Provost, Tim Tracy, our Vice President for Philanthropy, Mike Ritchie, and his staff in UK Philanthropy, and our own UK Libraries Director of Philanthropy, Daniel King. And so on behalf of UK Libraries, Deirdre and I thank all of you for your generosity and your time and always your helpful advice. We look forward to our ongoing partnership with the Hayburn Initiative to preserve the legacy of Kentucky's great judge, John G. Hayburn II. Deirdre and her colleagues in the archives are already hard at work on the collection, on the Hayburn collection. And because of Martha's vision, which she just shared with you so eloquently, the Hayburn Initiative will strive to preserve the collections of other federal judges as well. UK Libraries will be reaching out to federal judges, especially in this region, to place their collections with us for preservation and future access by students and researchers. In addition to conducting interviews about Judge Hayburn's life and career, we also seek to collect and preserve the life stories of other federal judges in Kentucky and beyond so that future generations may understand better the work of our federal judiciary. And of course, as an archivist and oral historian, I must end with a story. Almost 45 years ago, I began my career conducting oral history interviews on the life and career of Chief Justice Fred Vinson. A few years later, I conducted interviews about the life and career of Justice Stanley Reed. and both of those collections are in UK libraries. And I'll never forget interviewing retired Justice Reed in his Supreme Court chambers in the mid-1970s. An old-fashioned Bank of Maysville calendar from his hometown hung proudly and prominently behind his desk in his office. I will also never forget Justice Reed expressing to me his great aggravation and disappointment that President Harry Truman nominated fellow Kentuckian Fred Vinson Chief Justice instead of him. He went on to graciously say that since President Truman didn't pick him, even though he was more qualified, he was glad that he chose another Kentuckian. I couldn't be more pleased at this point in my career to have the opportunity to play a small role in the Heyburn Initiative and even get to conduct some of the oral histories going forward. I look forward to many more fascinating answers to our historical questions that the archives and the oral histories will reveal to future generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing David Brennan, Dean and Professor of Law at University of Kentucky College of Law. Dean Brennan joined UK in 2009 from the University of Georgia School of Law, where he was a professor since 2006, and from the Association of American Law Schools, where he served a two-year term as deputy director. Along with more than 20 years of experience in the classroom, Brennan is regarded as an innovator in the field of nonprofit law as it relates to taxation. And he has been an innovator with us, helping to secure our vision for the future. Dean Brennan.
Thank you and welcome. It's great to have you all here today. As Dr. Heyburn mentioned, I'm Dean Brennan, or David Brennan, Dean of the Law School. I want to thank Dr. Heyburn and everyone that made this event possible here today. I want to give special thanks to the Honorable John G. Roberts, Jr., who is here. I saw him myself, and he will be speaking later this morning. James C. Duff, Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts, and if any of you do not know, a former UK basketball player. And Judicial Courage Conference panelist, Professor Pamela Brandwine, who's suffering an illness but is still here today fighting strong for us. She's from the Department of Political Science at University of Michigan. And the Honorable Jeremy Fogel, Director of the Federal Judicial Center, and the Honorable Carl E. Stewart, Chief Judge of the United States Courts of Appeal for the Fifth Circuit. We are honored to have all of these special guests here today in the heart of the Bluegrass and appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. I've thanked Dr. Heyburn. Specifically, I want to make sure that we thank her for allowing UK law to share in this continuing legacy of her husband in making all of this possible. And of course, UK Libraries for their partnership and the UK administration for its support. Now, as you've heard a few times this morning, there's several aspects of the Heyburn Initiative that we want to acknowledge. This all started last fall, and it's to honor U.S. Senior District Judge John G. Heyburn. It's a collaboration between the libraries, the law school, and basically it's intended to enhance the students' education in some very distinct and unique ways. The Heyburn Initiative creates a speaker series, which you are here to participate in today, that's going to stress the importance of the role of the federal judiciary by providing regular opportunities for students to directly engage distinguished jurists from across the country. In concert with the Administrative Office of the Courts and the Federal Judicial Center, the Heyburn Initiative, through the College of Law, will also serve as a host and organizer for conferences and training sessions for federal judges, administrators, and staff. Beginning today and beyond, our students will have a very unique opportunity to hear firsthand from our nation's thought leaders in the law, including their distinguished members of the judiciary and lawmakers. The College of Law will be the only law school in the nation to house this type of conference, and one of the very few to offer this type of access to speakers of the highest caliber on a regular basis. Selected speakers and participants of both the lecture series and the conference will engage with UK law students in the classroom, as Justice Roberts is doing now in terms of a personal interaction with the students, and they will also participate in ancillary social and educational events. I hope you feel, as I do, that this initiative will help UK law continue its tradition of excellence in legal education. Now, let's transition to the program on judicial courage. It is my pleasure to introduce Judge Jeremy Fogle. Jeremy Fogle has been director of the Federal Judicial Center since 2011. He was appointed as a U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of California in 1998 and previously was a judge in the California State Courts. After beginning his career in private practice, he founded the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley's Mental Health Advocacy Project in 1978 and served as directing attorney until 1981. Judge Fogle.
Thank you so much, Dean Brennan and Dr. Haber and everyone else. It's a tremendous honor to be here. And we're going to get right to work. I want to introduce my fellow panelists, and we will start talking about judicial courage. So joining me now, first, Chief Judge Carl Stewart of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, someone I've really enjoyed getting to know and become friends with. He's a great judicial leader, as you'll see. And Professor Pam Brandwein from the University of Michigan, Department of Political Science. Met her, she's a scholar on Reconstruction, and particularly the last 50 years of the 19th century, where there was actually quite a bit of judicial courage, and we're going to hear about some of that today. So we'll get right to it. Thank you. Mic's on? Yeah. Okay, good. So I'd like to actually start this conversation by saying a little bit more about John Heyburn. And of course, we've heard a lot about him, but he's one of those people you really can't say enough about. And if I can give you a little bit of a personal perspective, as Dean Brennan said, I'm a Californian. I spent my entire legal and judicial career there until 2011. And then in 2011, I had the great honor of becoming the head of the Federal Judicial Center. And the Federal Judicial Center is the research and educational agency of the U.S. federal judiciary. So we train judges, we provide continuing education, and we do research on a variety of matters of judicial administration. It's a really, really interesting job. And one of the things I get to do as a part of that job is to travel all over the country to places like this and work with the leadership of the federal judiciary all over the country. And one of the first people I met when I came to the FJC was John Heyburn. He at that time was the chair of the multi-district litigation panel. This is a organization or an agency that manages very complex cases that are pending in many different parts of the country, tries to coordinate them, assign them to a single judge for management. It's a very intricate job. It requires a lot of political awareness, a lot of people skills, a lot of understanding of the law and its complexities. And the people who have been chosen as chairs tend to be really outstanding leaders. That's how they end up getting that job. That's one of the basic qualifications for it. And John Heyburn was very much part of that. He was a very effective and very influential leader of the multi-district litigation panel. And one of the things I noticed right away, apart from the fact that I just liked him, was how much respect he enjoyed, that people all over the country respected him as a thoughtful leader, as somebody who had good judgment, and someone who could do the right thing on a consistent basis. Before he was the chair of the MDL panel, that's what we call it, multi-district litigation, he had another job, and it was mentioned earlier. He was the chair of the Budget Committee of the Judicial Conference of the United States. I can't think of any committee of the Judicial Conference of the United States that ends up being more important on a daily basis, because they are the ones who get us the resources we need to do our jobs. They have to interact on a ongoing basis, daily, sometimes hourly basis, with Congress, with various congressional committees and staff. Sometimes the issues are quite sensitive. A lot of times the relationships between the branches are not all that cooperative. To be somebody in Congress wants the judiciary to do something that the judiciary doesn't want to do, and we have to get in, and they give us our money, so they have some leverage over us, and it takes it takes real talent to manage that relationship, to build credibility, to have the people on the Hill say, well, when that person says something, we can take it to the bank, literally, that it's true, we can count on it. And it takes a great deal of respect for that person's credibility, that person's flexibility, that person's ability to communicate. And John Hayburn had that job for many years, and he was great at it. So these are just ways that his leadership was manifested. Our program today is about judicial courage, and I want to say one more thing about John Hayburn, and then we'll kind of get into the topic of our presentation. So toward the end of his career, John, and those of you in Kentucky know this, had one of the same-sex marriage cases. It was called Burke versus Brashear. And I'm not bringing this up to take a position on the issue of same-sex marriage. That's not my point. The point is that this was a case that tested the courage of the judge to whom it was assigned. The legal arguments were very powerful. There was obviously very strong feeling on both sides of the issue. And I've read the decision, it was a wonderful decision, in not only whether you agree or disagree with the outcome, but just the way it was articulated and the way he thought about it and the way he said, the law is making us reach this conclusion. And he did that in a context where probably it was not a popular decision among many people in his community and people in his life, but he did it anyway because he concluded, after going through the reasoning and following the law and the legal principles, he concluded it was the right thing to do, that it was the only thing to do. And that is a great mark of judicial courage. And as we talk about other judges going back to the post-Civil War era who have demonstrated that, there's a common thread, and we'll keep coming back to this common thread, that it isn't, as sometimes there's a caricature of judges just saying, well, judges are just unelected legislators, they do whatever they want, and they just figure out what outcome they like, and then they work back. That the real essence of great judging is to think through what the law demands of us, and to think through what the principles of the law, the Constitution, the statutes, the prior cases, and to think about the case before us, and then to do our very, very best to apply that as honestly as we can. And if we don't like the result, that's too bad. If the people in the community don't like the result, we have an obligation to explain it to them. But it's not our job to shy away from a difficult result. And I think John Hayburn, in that case and in many others, demonstrated that kind of judicial integrity and that kind of judicial courage. So it's in his honor, and to kick off this wonderful initiative, we're going to talk about some other examples of judicial courage. And I'm going to start by asking Professor Brandwein to talk to us a little bit about this. There's a stereotype in our history about Reconstruction, that it was kind of a lawless era in some ways. And there actually wasn't quite that clear, that there's a lot of nuance, and there were some great examples during that era of judicial courage. So Pam, why don't you take us off in that direction?
Well, thank you, Judge Vogel, and thank you, Dr. Hayburn. It's an honor to be here with everybody today. And I need to first apologize. I'm getting over a bad cold, and so if I reach for a cough drop or the water or tissue, please excuse me. But I'm here to talk about actually a trio of judges. And they're working at the turn of the 20th century, the very late 19th century, early 20th century. And this is a period of actually the early years of Jim Crow. It's not the middle or late years of Jim Crow, and we'll be hearing about that later, but These are folks working in the 1890s, 1900, and this trio consists of Jacob Trieber. He worked in the Eastern District of Arkansas. Thomas Good Jones, who is in the Middle District of Alabama, and Emery Spear, who is in the Southern District of Georgia, all federal district judges. And they were all very vocally out of step with their communities. And not just their communities, their states and their national political parties. And they were all associated in various ways, and they had different partisan identifications. Trieber was a Republican, Thomas Good Jones was an active Democrat, and Emery Spear was an independent. But they were all associated with visions of the New South. And they were associated with visions of the New South that lost. They were vocally anti-Klan. They were vocally anti-peonage and debt servitude. They all supported black voting and a free and secure ballot. And they all also supported economic development in very powerful ways. But all of their visions lost. And they lost out to the Ben Pitchfork Tillmans of South Carolina and the James Vardamans of Mississippi. And so in many ways, this trio of judges and those like them have been lost to history, and they've been lost to legal history. And all three of them wrote profoundly important cases that exemplified both personal courage and what I like to call intellectual courage and judicial courage, because all three of them are writing decisions that put Klansmen in jail. Trieber under the 13th Amendment, Good Jones under the 14th Amendment, and Emery Spear under the 15th Amendment. And we know nothing of these cases. They've been lost to memory given conventional ways of thinking about Reconstruction. And so I wanted to talk just a bit about each of these three judges, focusing more on Trieber and Jones, because we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to say something about Spear's decision, which he actually argued as a U.S. attorney. And so let me start with Jacob Trieber. He, like I said, was a Republican. He was the first Jew on the federal bench. He grew up in Prussia. He was an immigrant. And his experience in Prussia really seemed to have shaped him. He witnessed quite a bit of discrimination against Jews in Prussia, and he brought that experience with him to the bench. And upon his appointment in 1900, there's a newspaper in Helena in Arkansas that said, quote, "It was long given in Arkansas that no Republican, no foreigner, or no Jew could ever hold office in that state." And Trieber was all three. And when Trieber was appointed, he was distinctive for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons was that he enjoyed considerable support by Democrats. Democrats supported him when he was U.S. attorney. Democratic newspapers supported him. He had the support of Democratic judges on the Arkansas Supreme Court. Prominent Democrats of the local bar supported him. And this is unusual because Trieber was a Republican. He was an old guard Republican who associated himself with President Grant, whose reputation is being rehabilitated these days. But he was really a remarkable judge. He had tremendous integrity that was recognized by everybody. He had an enormous amount of learning. He had unquestioned integrity. He was known as the walking encyclopedia of Arkansas Republicanism. He was known as the ablest Republican in Arkansas. And as the New York Times reported after he did a stint in New York, apparently Judge Trieber had, quote, little consideration for poor lawyering. And in terms of his personal and intellectual courage, the language he used and the way he carried himself on the bench was remarkable for the combination that he exhibited. He never expressed scorn for individuals. He never expressed scorn for the moonshiners who were constantly being prosecuted in eastern Arkansas. He never expressed scorn for individual Democrats. Yet, he had a variegated perception. He spoke about Democrats in multiple voices. He didn't put them all in one category. And so while he talked about, quote, swamp Democrats, the Ben Tillmans of the world, the James Vardimans of the world, and Arkansas has a border with Mississippi. And so James Trieber was quite familiar with what James Vardaman was doing in Mississippi. And he spoke explicitly about demagogues. He spoke explicitly about racism. He said, this is Trieber, he said, "The demagogue is the worst foe of our free institutions. Let us try to enthrone reason and eradicate prejudice and follow the precepts laid down in that divinely inspired instrument, the Declaration of Independence." But part of the reason Trieber was so respected was not just the way he conducted his courtroom and his vast learning, but he aligned himself always and consistently with the state of Arkansas. And he aligned himself with the good people of Arkansas. And he expressed his regret that there was so much violence. He said, "People wouldn't know there is anything in Arkansas except murder and demagoguery. This country is growing in leaps and bounds." And again, he's an advocate of economic development. He wanted capital investment in Arkansas. And he says, "The country is growing by leaps and bounds while Arkansas sleeps." And so he didn't use vigorous language on behalf of black rights, but he did, like I said, speak about racism and demagoguery. And he said, actually, it would be better if, quote, well-meaning Northerners would keep quiet and trust the good people of the South to find the solution to the race problem. And he actually thought the opinions of Emery Spear, who I'll be speaking about in just a moment, he said those opinions were, quote, too passionate, even though Judge Trieber said they were based fully, they were justified by the facts. And so it's the combination that Judge Trieber exhibited that allowed him to be so successful on the bench, to have the respect of Democrats, to be involved in getting the Elaine riots, the perpetrators of the Elaine riots prosecuted. He took actions that got this opinion up to the Supreme Court in Moore versus Dempsey. This was a mob-dominated trial, and one of the things that ties all three justices together is a respect for rule of law. And for them, rule of law meant prosecution of Klan violence and a condemnation of local officials who refused to punish Klan violence. And another one of the distinctive factors of Judge Trieber is that he saw the role of judges and lawyers in this environment. Remember, this is the environment where Jim Crow is getting started. We see the disenfranchisement campaigns of 1890. We see the beginning of lynch law. We actually don't see legal segregation quite yet in some of these states. That happens later. But it's the violence, the unpunished violence and the condemnation of that ties all of these three judges. And Trieber is in communication with Judge Jones, who I'll speak about in just a minute. And I wanted to quote one more thing from Judge Trieber. He's writing to Judge Jones, who is in the middle of his own Klan trial. And Judge Jones had sought Trieber's counsel. And Trieber writes to Jones. He says, and Jones is a Democrat. Jones is an ex-Confederate. He fought for the Confederacy. He supported redemption. But he's going to be very distinctive, as I'll talk about in just a moment, again, in his condemnation of Klan violence and his support for black voting rights, and his condemnation of peonage. And Trieber is writing to Jones. He says, quote, "I see a rift in the clouds when men like yourself and Judge Spear of Georgia, natives of the South and ex-Confederates, when men like yourself lead in this patriotic movement to awaken the conscience of our people, if every man in the South who believes as we do would only have the moral courage exhibited by you and others, I sincerely believe that this question could be solved to the lasting benefit of our country." And so Trieber is really in the forefront of urging judges like himself, again, this handful of Southern District judges whose memory has been lost to history and whose cases have been lost to legal history. And the rift in the clouds, that phrase is actually lifted by a historian named Brent Aucoin, who's written a book about some of these judges. Aucoin doesn't quite, I think, get the content of their decisions, and I do want to talk just ever so briefly about the content of their decisions. And let me just speak briefly about Trieber's one decision before I turn to Jones. Trieber wrote an opinion called United States versus Morris, which was the companion case to a case called Hodges versus the United States. And this is a case where Klansmen had interfered in the rights of black individuals to cultivate and lease lands. And so they're conspiring to interfere with what is the right to contract. And Trieber gives us a reading of the 13th Amendment that historians today would say is exactly in line with the original understanding of the 13th Amendment. And so Trieber is being a first-rate legal historian when he says that the 13th Amendment provides to black individuals the right to contract free from racial interference. And Trieber, in this opinion, invokes the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 13th Amendment. And I would say he's doing this properly. He's giving a fully justified constitutional reading. And he's doing this in the face of growing Klan violence in Arkansas. And it takes a tremendous amount of personal courage to do this and intellectual courage. Because what he's doing in writing this opinion is that he's citing cases like the civil rights cases that today are associated with the abandonment of black rights and with narrow constructions of Reconstruction legislation, and that Democrats at the time were construing very narrowly. And so Trieber is going against his local community, but he's also going against this growing interpretive convention around these Reconstruction cases. And Trieber's actually giving us the proper constitutional reading. And he is sending Klansmen to jail, and he's willing to do that. And this is an opinion that actually gets overturned by the Fuller Court in the Hodges case of 1906. And it's a real shame that Trieber's district case has been lost, because conventional wisdom takes that Hodges case as actually the proper reading of the 13th Amendment, and that's actually not at all the case. And so Trieber should be recognized both for what he's doing on the ground as well as for his profoundly important case in Morris and Hodges. And just turning to Thomas Good Jones, there are a number of similarities between Trieber and Good Jones. And again, one of those similarities is the absolute commitment to rule of law and to protecting African American citizens against racial violence. And Good Jones writes an opinion called Ex parte Riggins, and he follows it up with another opinion called United States versus Powell that involved Klansmen who had taken black prisoners who had been held in lawful custody in prison, and they lynched them. And this is a problem that had become widespread in the South as part of the establishment of Jim Crow. But Good Jones has a very different initial profile than Trieber. Good Jones, again, fought in the Confederacy. He was the head of the Alabama militia. He believed in redemption. He opposed Reconstruction. But again, his vision of the New South is not the vision that succeeds. His vision is also overwhelmed by the Tillmans and the Vardamans. Good Jones gets on the map in a number of ways because he saved a black man from a lynching in 1883. And he did this when he was the head of the state militia. And that obviously took personal courage. And this was the beginning of a friendship between Jones and Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington operated behind the scenes in many ways at this time. And Good Jones and Washington had a lifelong friendship. And Booker T. Washington recommended Thomas Good Jones to the federal bench to Teddy Roosevelt. And Jones was appointed on Booker T. Washington's recommendation. And so Good Jones, he's got the Middle District of Alabama, And Booker T. Washington actually assists Good Jones in a number of ways. He actually helped Good Jones become governor of Alabama in 1890. And when Jones was on the Alabama State Constitutional Convention in 1890, he expressed, and he loses all of these fights. He expresses opposition to lynching. He says, nothing but bloodshed in defense of the prisoner. Again, he's talking about this growing practice of taking African Americans from custody and lynching them. He says, nothing but bloodshed in defense of the prisoner ever excuses an officer from permitting a mob to take his prisoner. And he's very, very vocal about this. Jones actually supported severe penalties against law officers who didn't defend prisoners from lynch mobs. He's actually willing to put sheriffs in jail who don't do their jobs to prevent lynch mobs. He's extremely unusual in this regard. And his life is threatened as a result of this. He sustained many, he received many death threats, and he persevered through this. Even again, as I said, he was in favor of redemption. He opposes debt peonage. He worked with Booker T. Washington on the Alonzo Bailey case that found its way to the Supreme Court. He resisted pressures from white farmers who supported peonage. He directly challenged the forces of disenfranchisement, he said, everyone knew that these proposals were designed to strike down the suffrage of the black race and uphold the suffrage of the white race. Again, he's doing this at the state constitutional convention, enduring threats. He loses the vote, but again, he perseveres. And again, for somebody who supported redemption, he also supported schooling for black students. He supported taking white tax money to support black education. And in that regard, again, he's tremendously out of step with his community, with his party, again, enduring threats by the Klan. Let me mention one thing about his pair of cases, because they're remarkable cases. Folks don't read them today. He's in his decision in Riggins. In his decision in Riggins, which has a companion case in Powell, Jones is giving us an accurate mapping of Reconstruction-era case law when it comes to black rights. And he's looking at cases like Cruikshank, which is a case involving a massacre, a voting rights massacre, that again is remembered today as shutting the door on federal enforcement. That's actually an incorrect reading. And Cruikshank actually supplies resources for the Supreme Court to prosecute especially black voting rights. And Cruikshank, as well as the civil rights cases, give us robust readings of the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. Now, not when it comes to public accommodation rights, certainly not when it comes to racial intermarriage, certainly not when it comes to integrated schooling. But when it comes to those things that bound all three of these judges that I'm speaking about, property, contract, suing, the right to physical security, and the right to vote, those things bound all three of these district judges. And Jones is giving us an accurate mapping when he says the 14th Amendment actually provides authority to punish Klansmen who are not punished by state officials, and he develops this very innovative reading of the Due Process Clause, where he says that prisoners lawfully in custody have a due process right to have a trial, and if they're found guilty, then they are to be punished. But when a mob comes and lynches you, you are being deprived of due process. And it's a very innovative reading that's actually based quite smartly on case law that existed, and he's being quite courageous in giving us this reading of case law in the midst of threats to his life. And it's that combination that really distinguishes him. Even though, as like I always like to keep saying, he opposes Reconstruction and believes the South should handle its own affairs, but like Judge Trieber, he condemns the demagogues like Tillman and Vardaman. And so, just to wrap this up, one word about Emory Speer. Emory Spear is from Georgia. Again, he fought for the Confederacy. He became an independent. As the U.S. attorney, he argues the case that unfortunately very few people know about today. It's a case called Ex parte Yarborough. And in Yarborough, Spear, again, against threats to his life, looks to case law. And what he finds accurately, it's really there, you can go look. There's an interpretation of the 15th Amendment that Spear pulls out, and Spear argues this case before the Supreme Court. Klansmen are on trial, and Spear wins his case, and the Supreme Court, in a unanimous case, this is unheard of, right, given the conventional wisdom. In 1884, a unanimous Supreme Court sends Klansmen to jail under the 15th Amendment. And this is Spear. This is Spear's work as a lawyer. This is Spear's courage in facing down the Klan and threats to his life. And again, these are all commonalities that all three of these judges share, even though some are Republicans, two of them fought for the Confederacy, but they really do share this vision of the New South that is overpowered and recovering their examples of their integrity, the profound respect that they had despite their positions. Judge Trieber was constantly invited to come to other courts and to adjudicate other courts, the dockets on other courts, because of the respect that he enjoyed. And so their regard was really quite impressive, especially in this era where Jim Crow is getting established, and they're enduring, as I said, multiple threats. So I will stop there.
It's just really remarkable stories, and the thing that comes through is not only the tremendous personal courage, but they were absolutely fiercely devoted to the rule of law. This was a characteristic of all three of these judges.
Yeah, and being committed to the rule of law, I think we could all take cues from them today, because their readings of the rule of law in 1900 of these profoundly important cases of the Reconstruction era, they're actually giving better interpretations, better understandings of the original understanding, better understandings of the civil rights cases, better understandings of the Cruikshank decision than we have today. Their readings are better than what we read in constitutional law textbooks today, which is really quite remarkable. So I would recommend to everybody, read the Yarborough case, read Trieber's case in Morris, read the Riggins and the Powell pair of decisions.
Okay, so we're gonna fast forward, not too far, but as you said, during the era that these judges were deciding cases, Jim Crow was kind of getting firmly ensconced, and of course it did. And in the 20th century, that became the source of tremendous amount of work by the old Fifth Circuit. As most of you know, the Fifth Circuit that existed back then was divided. There's the 11th Circuit, which is Florida and Georgia and Alabama, and then the Fifth Circuit is Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi. And Judge Stewart is the chief judge of the new Fifth Circuit, the current Fifth Circuit, but he's going to talk about some of the history and the judicial courage of judges in the Fifth Circuit in the subsequent years.
All right, thank you. Let me just give my thanks to Chief Justice Roberts, to Judge Vogel, to the UK family, and particularly to Dr. Habern and your family for honoring me to be here to participate in this historic event. I'm a child of the 50s and 60s. I grew up in a segregated high school. I graduated from a segregated high school, so I was a child growing up during the turbulent 50s and 60s when many of these judges were sitting on the bench. So I count it as an extreme honor to have a chance to reflect back on a period where I, as a child, could not really understand a lot of what was going on, a lot that were swirling, all the typical questions you have as a child. Why this? Why that? Why can't we drink out of that water fountain? Why do we have to go to the doctor's office through this entrance that says colored? Why we have to go through the side entrance to the Strand Theater and ask the white guy to go get the popcorn, to bring it up. These are all kinds of questions that as a child you have and you don't understand what's going on. So when I fast forward to my AARP years, I rebuffed it as long as I could, but I take the discounts whenever they want to offer to me. So in my twilight years, as my grandchildren would say, I reflect back on those times, both with one foot into the 50s and 60s when I grew up and didn't understand it, and then to be here looking back at a lot of legal decisions and so on and so forth. Now, I don't have the optimism that the professor has, that you're going to run out here, find those cases and read them. She may think so. But I've been on the bench a long time as a trial judge, and I just kind of think you got about all you're going to get here.
Now, I was just booking my ticket to Helena, Arkansas. I want to go see it.
But a lot of my idealism has since dissipated. So at any rate, so I'm not going to try so much to give you the cases as much to try to give you a flavor of persons who served as judges during the era that we talked about, that really the professor has given us a great preface. I learned so much in just reading her material about the Reconstruction area, et cetera, and want to feel like a lot of what occurred really was a predicate to what happened, because I know as a judge, one of the things we do is we read. And I want to think that some of the judges that I'll talk about probably had, Professor, read some of those and knew about some of the persons, and it helped to forge some of the courage they have. The Fifth Circuit, as mentioned, originally was the 6 states, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. It was the cradle of the old Confederacy, simply put, in there. And so in the height of the 50s, the early 60s, the Civil Rights Movement, they were battleground states. Now, I know though that term is used in a different political context, but they literally were the battleground states where much change was sought to be made. And frankly, there was a lot of violence between, in the professor's writings, when I read about Judge Trieber, it was called white capping, but when I grew up, it was the Knights of the Klan with that. And so they were precursors of this. And so it wasn't just discourse and dissent, but it was actually violence. It was ostracism from it. And so there's so many judges I could talk about individually, but I'm not going to try to do in-depth, but I really want to give you a flavor for what it was like, as Jeremy says, that it took some real courage. Now, as I tell my children often, there's a lot to be said for lifetime tenure, okay? A lot to be said. I found that out when I was chief judge, first on the seat, Judge Duff, and the government shut down. And I'm like, why do I get to be chief judge when the government has no money? But at any event, it was sobering to know that at the end of the month I could pay my creditors, even though the government was shut down. But I say that in jest, but it is to say the lifetime tenure of these federal judges did help to protect them against at least that, not being boarded out. Not that that was a big concern, but just knowing that they could make many of the hard decisions they had to make without worrying about, well, somebody's not going to pay my family and so on and so forth. And so I'm going to cast my comments in 2 lights, because some of the judges I'll talk about were Court of Appeal judges, and others were the district court judges. To the delight of my colleagues out there, I spend most of my time talking about the district court judges, because as they would say, if I took a poll, they have the best job in the world. They look askance somewhat at what circuit judges do and so forth. We're not down with the people and so on and so forth. But as you see, many of these were judges who served both ways. But I want to cover from 2 aspects, because the district court judges were on the ground. They were there with the people. They actually had the people coming in the courtroom with the hatred, with the passion, et cetera, and had to go back in. The Court of Appeals judges were not immune from this, as I'll share, but to an extent, Court of Appeal judges are more isolated. They can walk through the grocery stores and so forth, and nobody knows who they are. I mean, people know who I am, but they can go through. But the district judges, once you're kind of out there to face. And so for the judges we talked about, where people knew where they lived and where they were and so forth, it was particularly acrimonious. The other thing I want to say in preface is that one of the hallmarks of being a federal judge is collegiality. And even on the district bench, so much of what we do is girded by the fact that very smart people, men and women, may disagree about legal principles, but it's the collegiality that really allows the rule of law to work. And so on the district court, but certainly on the Court of Appeal, when the collegiality is adversely impacted, there is a problem. And I will tell you, as chief judge of a circuit with 17 judges, collegiality and trying to keep things in balance, it's a full-time job. Probably 75% of my time is on non-case related work. But as I like to say, I manage resources and relationships. And that's my premium job. So as chief judge, I can reflect back on Judge Elbert Tuttle, who was chief judge of the old Fifth Circuit during the turbulent time that we're speaking of. And so to say that here's a judge that is having to manage resources and relationships in times of great hostility, I'm reflecting back, whoa, I thought I had problems, but, very difficult time. The other thing that's interesting is that many of the persons spoken here were Eisenhower appointees. I note now we could rule on the XYZ whatever, and the first thing that the newspaper in New Orleans will print, Judge Stewart was appointed by Bill Clinton. Judge so-and-so was appointed by Ronald Reagan. So whatever the decision may be, it could be a criminal case, it could be about anything. But what the media first does is say, such and such a judge was appointed. And I'm sure in Judge Habron's case, when he made the rulings, probably the first thing the Courier-Journal and others did, he was appointed by such and such a judge. And so it's interesting making this reflective to note that if you didn't know, and looking at some of these judges, you would not guess that many of them were appointed by President Eisenhower. They were leading politicos in the Republican convention to get Eisenhower elected. And much of the foment was caused by the Democrats, Senator Eastland and others, who were really the ones who were delaying appointments. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of times and labels to really see. The other thread is most of these judges were not what we call activists in their secular lives. They did not come to the bench as being, president of this organization, the ACLU, or NAACP, or whatever. Several, like Judge John Minor Wisdom, was an upper-crust aristocrat, members of these exclusive clubs and so forth, moneyed people, people who were wealthy when they came on the bench, et cetera. So they had no frame of mind of, well, before I got on the bench, I led all these charges and so forth. They actually came to the bench with an idea of solemnity. When Judge Tuttle was actually, Elbert Tuttle served as the chief judge of the Fifth Circuit, the old Fifth Circuit, for the longest period of time during all of this stuff. He was born in Hawaii, he was raised in California, didn't even know anything about this. He had served in Republican politics to help get Eisenhower elected, et cetera, served in the Department of Treasury, and when he was appointed to the Fifth Circuit, he said, quote, "I'm going home to retire on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals," close quote. He thought it was a place of isolation, solemnity. They don't really work that hard anyway. So he thought he was trying, but who knew? But it's to echo Jeremy's point, when people came to the bench, they took the oath to preserve the rule of law. And so even though their thought pattern might have been, deal with a few securities cases, sentence a few people, et cetera, who knew that the social upheaval outside would bring these cases into the court? Which the beauty of the era is that it was the rule of law at work. It was not violence in the street. There were lawsuits that were being brought. So it was the essence of the way that disputes should be brought. And so Judge Tuttle served as chief judge of the court when in the old era of the original Fifth Circuit, there were 26 circuit judges. Trust me, too many. 26. I have 17, and it's tough with 17 judges. I'd love to be on the First Circuit. There are only 5 circuit judges, but in any event. But you imagine the court grew to 26 judges, which is the reason it was split in 1981. So I'm just trying to give you a flavor of Judge Tuttle as chief judge with having that many judges. But the other point is to say, as these controversial decisions were being made, I can tell you from experience, not everybody on that court was happy about it. And I can tell you, it probably did affect the collegiality on the court itself because other judges thought that these judges were being activists. They were reaching in areas that they shouldn't have reached and so forth. And so it's kind of that backdrop as we talk about courage to do the thing that's right, notwithstanding that the people who you normally go to lunch with now don't want to go to lunch with you. There's other ostracism and so forth. And so I'm going to quickly just hit through some of these judges, not so much all the decisions, but some of the kinds of things that occurred. There's a lot of literature on it. Jack Bass has written a book, Unlikely Heroes. You perhaps have read it. That really capture the four judges. Judge John Minor Wisdom, who I had the privilege when I came on the bench in 1994. Judge Wisdom was still sitting at 92. Of these great judges on the court, Judge Richard Reeves, Judge John Brown of Houston. And I want to say a word about Judge Reeves because I think he's one who's lesser known in this group, but I think when you hear a little bit more, it will give you a flavor for what occurred. Judge Reeves was the only Democrat in that grouping. The rest were Republicans who had come to the bench and so forth. He was appointed by Harry Truman. He was from Montgomery, Alabama, and during the course of his time, he presided over many of the desegregation decisions that were there. Many of his legal opinions, frankly, broke the barriers against highly segregated counties from Texas to Florida, the school desegregation cases, voting rights cases, public accommodations, all of these cases. And he was derided for having done so. I think the epitome of you getting the essence of it, Judge Reeves had a son, Richard Reeves Jr., who he was very devoted for. And Judge Reeves, was a conservative person, conservative in the sense of his values, et cetera, et cetera. And so he came to appreciate what was going on, the bigotry in the country and so forth. But his son, it's told, had really helped his dad to come to appreciate the absolute wrongness of what was going on in society. Judge Reeves' son was killed in a car wreck in 1949, and it devastated him. And throughout this turbulent period, Judge Reeves' son's grave was decimated repeatedly by the Klan and by other people because of rulings that Judge Reeves had made. It broke his heart, and the scholars in the book say that it just tore him up, that people would be so mean-spirited and so forth, not only against him. There were editorials that were written against him. It said that he was actually put out of his own church. I mean, the church did not want him there. So if you can imagine having a hard day during the week and you want to go to church for some solemnity, et cetera, and the very people of where you're going for solace and so forth are ostracizing. They don't want to sit about it. They're talking about you and so forth. So these are the kinds of psychological elements that these judges went through, but yet they had the courage of their convictions to do the right thing. And so notwithstanding, he was not bitter at the things about the grave and so forth. He just said, I pity people who have that hatred and that meanness in their hearts. He did not ostracize them or become bitter, but he continued to do it. He was labeled as one of the four who wrote groundbreaking decisions about school desegregation, et cetera, during a time, and one whose name is not known as much as Judge Wisdom's or Judge Brown's or the other ones, but he's once there. I want to mention Judge Frank Johnson. Judge Frank Johnson served as a practicing lawyer. He served as United States Attorney for the Northern District of Montgomery. He was appointed to the district bench when he was 27 years old. He then was the youngest federal judge in the country coming on during that time at 27 years. Can you believe that? That he went on the bench at that time. But his background as U.S. Attorney, growing up at Montgomery, he was in the seat of the time period. When he was appointed was just at the time when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus in the 1950s. During the Selma March, it was Judge Johnson who was on the bench. The recalcitrant He had many tete-a-tetes with Governor George Wallace over what wouldn't happen, what couldn't happen, the admissions in Georgia, et cetera. These were all the cases that Judge Johnson had to face as a judge, but he was on the bench 27 years. The week of my high school graduation, Time Magazine did the cover on Judge Frank Johnson. I'm not sure if all district judges really want that picture on the front of Time Magazine for other reasons, but it was a period of time of great dissent of law and so on and so forth. But he was a great man who was ostracized as well, crosses burned in his yard, and all of that. And if you can imagine, how do you go to the grocery store? Now they would assign marshals to you 24 hours. There's a great book written by Jack Bass called The Taming of the Storm, which is a biography of great Judge Johnson. And I would encourage you to read that. Now you say you didn't have any faith that you'd read her opinions, but I got more faith.
See, you
that,
are optimistic. You're
well,
realistic.
I figure you'll pull the
Read
book up on Kindle or something else, and you might read that. I don't think you're gonna pull up no opinions to be reading in the airport. So there's a shot that you might. But they go into detail of the lives of these people, and it allows us to see them as human beings, not as demagogues who do it. The rest of the district judges I want to talk about is Judge James Skelly Wright. A lot of people don't know Judge James Skelly Wright. Now, Judge Wisdom was an aristocrat, member of the Boston Club, the Mardi Gras cruise. I mean, the upper crust on there, but yet he was outside. But Judge James Skelly Wright came from working class parents. He had to drop out because his parents couldn't afford money for him to finish school and so forth. He went on the bench, and he is the one responsible for desegregating the schools in New Orleans. And it took 20 years, literally, for the schools to become desegregated in New Orleans. He had crosses burned in his yard. He was ostracized by his church. He had no social life, all the violence that was done. And he is not known. If something happened in his life, it did not happen to others. Later in his career, President Kennedy wanted to appoint him to the Fifth Circuit. And as I mentioned later, Judge Frank Johnson ultimately went to the Fifth Circuit and served on the 11th in the twilight of his career. President Kennedy wanted to appoint J. Skelly Wright to the Fifth Circuit. Senator James Eastland and others, Southern Democrats, were so vehemently opposed to the rulings that had been made by J. Skelly Wright and others of his ilk, absolutely would not let it happen. And there was so much opposition to it. And so, in fact, Judge J. Skelly Wright, President Kennedy, knowing the opposition, appointed J. Skelly Wright to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. And he served with distinction on the D.C. Court of Appeals, was the chief judge for a while there, and many of the judges reviewed him. But it was because of that violence, not only in the street, but by senators and others who would have no part of allowing his elevation. He served with distinction on the Court of Appeals of the D.C. Circuit. And so there are many tributes to these judges that focus on their case. And if you didn't know any better, you would think their whole docket was just civil rights cases. But one of the things I loved in reading the material about Judge Trieber, these were judges who were very bright in amnesty cases, in securities cases, in bankruptcy cases. And they wrote wonderful opinions in all these other areas. The civil rights cases were just the ones that were allocated to them. They did not shrink from the duty of doing it, just as the same-sex marriage case. I mean, you got a choice. You may not pick these cases, to do. I was a state court judge once. Let's just say sometimes people find a way of ducking cases that they didn't. But you get the case you draw. And the essence of the courage we speak is that these judges took these cases on, knew that the rule of law and the efficacy was really the way to handle these, but they were not blind, as Jeremy and I were talking about. These are human beings. They know that the op-ed writers in the newspaper are writing about it. They know that the editorial writers, the Rotary Club won't allow them to come in. They're not going to their favorite restaurant to eat. And imagine how that's affecting, but certainly I would say, imagine the effect on their families. They didn't get the appointment. It's the judge. Their children having to grow up in an environment where the kids at school are calling them names. Your dad's a certain lover. This kind of thing. Having to do it. just going, so there's not even any peace and tranquility at home. You have stress at the job, and then you have stress at home to go with it. But all of that, just to give sort of the human element to this judicial courage that we're talking about, and they represent a vast array of other judges similarly situated who may not have had civil rights cases, but other tough issues, well-briefed, but they call it the way they see it. And one of the things I like about reading about Ms. Traven and others, these were judges who did not have their eye on the Court of Appeal. They did not decide because, well, if I rule this way, I'll probably get affirmed. The beauty to me as a Court of Appeal judge, these judges did what they thought was the right thing to do. And they would let history bear out. If the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court affirms it, so let it be. Even if they don't, what I did is still the right thing. I know that I have a chorus there that feels when the Court of Appeal reverses them, they say they're still wrong, and we're right. And so the courage of these judges was just, they never backed down and read that Court of Appeal and said, well, maybe I got it right. No, they said, no, I made the right decision, and history will bear it out. So my synopsis, hopefully you have a flavor of these judges in a minute. One last point of two judges paid the ultimate price. Judge Robert Vance was a judge on the 11th Circuit who regrettably went out to his mailbox to get his mail. And when he got the mail, brought it back to the kitchen table, and a letter bomb exploded. Judge Vance was the first circuit judge to be killed while in office. His wife was severely injured, and it wasn't in a civil rights case. He had had some other cases, and this was a prisoner. Judge John Wood was a district court judge in the Western District of Texas, who was the first federal judge assassinated, who was actually murdered while he was on the bench there in San Antonio because of some cases he missed. So I mention him because there were district judges who were killed, not ostracized, in office, but directly related to work that they did. But I'm sure their courage was such that if they had to do over, they would do it over. So it's just to say the threat of violence, having marshals at your house 24 hours, all the protections, is a scary proposition to try to maintain your balance and then do the right thing. So I hope you get just a sense of the courage that we echo and share in this Heyburn Initiative.
And Carl, just to I think emphasize what I think is one of the most important points you made. You know, the people in the room who are not judges, I mean, the judges will recognize what I'm about to say, but, you know, there's ways when you get a case, there's ways you can avoid making hard decisions. I mean, you can find the facts in a particular way, or you can say, well, I'm just not going to deal with this. I'll let the circuit deal with it. You know, this happens. I don't think it happens very much in the federal judiciary. It certainly did in my experience as a state judge, though, because state judges had to run for elections, so there was even a greater incentive to duck hard issues. But these were not easy things, even for federal judges with life tenure, because of all the things that both Pam and Carl have talked about, the ostracism, the consequences, the death threats. I mean, probably the most controversial case I've had as a district judge, and it was when I was a district judge, you know, I really resonated with that. There was about a 3 or 4 day period where I just didn't want to go outside. You know, I didn't want to go to a restaurant to get dinner because somebody might see me and get angry with me about a decision I'd made. And I mean, these are really really important things that the character of the people we've been talking about. It's shaped by the tumult of the society we live in. And I mean, it makes me angry sometimes when I hear judges described as politicians in black robes. I mean, there may have been some of those, but I mean, the people we're talking about here, the thing that characterized them was the fidelity to the law, and that they were willing to risk their public reputation and their friendships and their social connections, and in some cases their lives, to follow the law. And you know, they didn't come on the bench with that intention. They came on the bench because they wanted to be judges, and maybe they liked admiralty cases a lot better than they liked civil rights cases, you know. But they had the courage to do what the job required. And I think we're out of time. This is a very fitting place to come back to John Heyburn, because that's who John was, and it's very fitting that we've honored him in this way. Thanks very much. Well done. Thanks so much for doing this.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great privilege to welcome to the University of Kentucky today the Chief Justice of the United States, John G. Roberts, Jr. Please join me in making him welcome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. It is great to be here in Kentucky. One reason is that it means I'm not in Washington. But it is a great honor to be here to celebrate and participate in the inaugural event of the John G. Heyburn Initiative for Judicial Excellence.
Hey, Mr. Chief Justice, and welcome to the Bluegrass. It's a real privilege and honor to be with you today.
Thanks very much.
It's
good to be in a place where SEC doesn't mean the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Exactly. It's very refreshing. I was thinking this morning, you know, you can drive from here to Paris, not about less than a half an hour. You can go down the road to London. You can go west and get over to Frankfurt. For many years, my children thought we were vacationing in Europe. And, there are many advantages to the Bluegrass. But it's a special privilege to have you with us today in the initiative for the Heyburn Initiative. And we look forward to talking with you more about many of your duties. And you've had a remarkable past 2 weeks, really. If you look at just what you've been involved with in the last 2 weeks, it gives us a glimpse of your responsibilities. You've administered the oath of office to the new President of the United States. You presided over the Smithsonian Board of Regents meeting as its chancellor. You participated in an historic event. Last night we witnessed together Kentucky beat Georgia in overtime. And today you're participating in one of our judiciary's prime initiatives, and that's educational outreach. And these are on top of all your regular duties as Chief Justice of the court, but your title is Chief Justice of the United States. So you have many other responsibilities beyond the Supreme Court. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about some of those other responsibilities and then talk about your work on the court this morning. Let's start with your duties as Chancellor of the Smithsonian. It's a little known fact that the Chief Justice performs that responsibility. And can you give us a little description of what that entails, and did you sneak the hippopotamus video out of your board meeting this week?
It actually does come from the Smithsonian. Well, when they told me I was Chancellor of the Smithsonian, I thought, well, that's a pretty impressive title. And I asked how much it paid, and they said, well, nothing. But the Chief Justice has been the Chancellor for over 100 years. And other members include the Vice President and designated members of Congress. The members from Congress attend the Board of Regents meeting. The Vice President hasn't for some time. And I think they provided for the Chief Justice to be there to provide some continuity. The Vice President would only be there for 8 years maximum. The congressman might come and go, but the idea is somebody would be there who can say, excuse me, when a proposal is made, we tried that 20 years ago or whatever, and it didn't work out. But it's a lot of fun, to be honest with you. You get to participate at the highest level over something that's very important. The Smithsonian is the largest curatorial institution in the world, but it's also the largest research facility in the world. And you get to participate in it when you don't really know a thing about it. I mean, I'm not there to provide expert knowledge about some research initiative or, you know, what paintings to hang in the art museum, but simply to help run the board meetings and provide that, excuse me, notion of continuity. But it is great fun. I learn a lot. It's an extremely talented board, and you do get to participate in important decisions that the institution makes. The very first day, Senator Leahy was one of the members of the Board of Regents, and he said, John, you're going to love this. It's a lot of fun. Nothing controversial ever comes up. We walk into the very first meeting, we have to wend our way through the protesters. We were making the decision that day on where to locate the new Museum of African American History and Culture. There were two options really at that point on the table, the one on the mall next to the Washington Monument where it is today, and the idea of sort of a campus further outside Washington where you could have many more buildings and other, sort of a college setting. And there were proponents on both sides, and I think the right decision was made to have the museum there on the mall in the center of the city, but there were strong advocates on either side. So the issues are fun, it's fascinating, it's kind of fortuitous that it comes with the job, but I'm glad it does. We have a little bit of a crisis, actually. The Smithsonian, also, I don't know if you know this, it runs the National Zoo. That's part of our museum complex. And unless it's been captured over this morning or last evening, we lost one of our bobcats that escaped the zoo. So people with small dogs are keeping them indoors until they but it wasn't my fault.
Well, it is a remarkable research institution, too, and few people know just how involved it is worldwide in research, so it's a remarkable organization. The other element that's little known about your responsibilities as Chief Justice of the United States is your work with the Judicial Conference of the United States and its committees. We talked about the Budget Committee, and Judge Hayburn was a chair of that committee for a number of years, and there are 25 committees involved in the Judicial Conference, and I think it'd be interesting to get your thoughts about the importance of the conference and its committees to the functioning of the judicial branch and its independence.
Yeah, this is the group that sets policy for the entire judiciary, not just the Supreme Court. Consists of the chief judge of every circuit and a district judge from within each circuit, and me. And we set priorities and things like budget. Like every other government entity, we need to get our money from Congress. We're almost a $4 billion organization. So we cost a little bit less than one aircraft carrier. And you get a whole branch of government for it. But we have to prioritize what we want from Congress. We have to justify the expenditures, ranging from new computer systems to new courthouses, to new pay for judges, to new judgeships. Do we need more judges here or there? And we have to justify those budgetary needs. The conference deals with important issues like rules. Lawyers and law students, they know about the rules of evidence, the rules of procedure, bankruptcy rules, all that. Well, those go through the Judicial Conference. It's a pretty laborious process. We don't just sit around and say, let's have a new rule about this. It takes several years. We have advisory committees for rules. They get complaints from lawyers, input from judges. We need to do this. For example, a big project we're involved with now is electronic discovery. It's one thing to have a discovery system when you're dealing with pieces of paper, which are relatively finite, and you can sort of go through them, and here's response to those requests, here are these. It's another thing when someone can have a discovery request that may be perfectly relevant when you put it in and it comes back, 2 million responsive documents, from emails to all sorts of things. So we're dealing with that now, new rules for how you get your hands around those things. That's a very important part of my responsibilities outside of the Supreme Court.
That is a great role for the branch to play for itself. Before the 1930s, there was no organization as such to run the branch. It actually depended on the Department of Justice to seek its funds from from the Congress. And it's, I think, a crucial element of the independence of the branch that we perform that function. And your involvement in the committee structure and your appointments to the committees are very important. There are many judges who are here today who've served on judicial conference committees and our budget committee, and we're all grateful for your input on that.
It has an interesting historic origin. Chief Justice Taft, some people know him as President Taft, we call him Chief Justice Taft, was largely responsible for a couple of initiatives that affect the court. One was just that, setting up an administrative office. I think it's probably because of his experience as president that he appreciated what might seem to be mundane reforms, but the significance of it. Mm-hmm. You're right. I mean, the Justice Department was the main litigant appearing before us, and they were responsible for our budget. That's not right. So he knew that and put it over in the administrative office that Jim ably directs. Sort of were responsible for that. The Judicial Conference is another reform that he was largely responsible for. Again, he knew that you ought to have a centralized entity, that we made our own our own rules rather than having them. Used to be chaotic. Each circuit would have its own set of rules. He knew, probably from his experience in the White House, that there needed to be one central location and we had to have control over it. And it may seem insignificant, but it's not. He was responsible for us getting our own building. Before the court moved to the new building in 1935, we met in the basement of the Capitol. Now, it's pretty hard to maintain your status as a separate and equal, co-equal branch of government if you're meeting in the basement of one of the other branches. And it was his force and stature as former president that got us the budget to build our own building. And, that may seem, well, that's a pretty petty thing. But if you think about it, whenever there is an important issue affecting the rule of law in this country, and often in the world, they'll put up a picture of the Supreme Court building. It is the emblem of the rule of law. And what would they do if we're in the basement of the Capitol? It's a significant, function follows form, and it's I think, a very significant, along with its other reforms, to give the branch equal stature.
Well, we're very grateful for your leadership in it, Chief, and one of the other responsibilities you've taken on is a year-end report you give to the country every year. You usually publish it on New Year's Day. And this year you focused on our district court judges and their work and their important work. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, like Judge Stewart said, I urge you to read these things, and I hope you do go online and read it.
I'm sure everyone here has read it.
For those of you who might have missed it, but do you care to reiterate some of the points you made in the report about the important work of our district court judges? And many people don't recognize them as much, certainly, as our Supreme Court justices. Sure.
Well, first of all, to step back a little bit, the year-end report, I think, originated with Chief Justice Warren Burger, sort of our branch's equivalent of the State of the Union, and it's delivered every year. Chief Justice Rehnquist, I think, had the reform to have it come out on New Year's Day. As you might imagine, a report on the state of the judiciary doesn't attract a big readership. He figured New Year's Day was the best day. It would be a slow news day. There really wouldn't be much else going on. And so that's when it is released. And it's sort of, I think I'm probably either responsible, whether for good or to blame. It's changed a little bit because even on New Year's Day, a report on the state of the judiciary isn't going to get a lot of traction. So it now I try to focus on one particular issue. I figure it's New Year's Day, it's just one issue, maybe somebody will read it. And this year, as you said, I focused on the role of the district court judges because they play, in many respects, the critical role in the judiciary. It's not only the starting where cases start, it's where most cases end. And it has been said there's no judge in the system, not even on the Supreme Court, that exercises as much power as a single district judge in his or her courtroom. So it's very important, and I went through the extraordinary caseload that they have to deal with, the contribution of senior district judges who carry, you know better than I do, I think it's about 25% of the workload
Yes.
of the trial courts, and focused a little bit on their responsibilities. I think they don't get the attention and credit that they're.
Well, it was very well received, Chief, and again, thank you for doing that. You've served as Chief Justice now for a little over a decade. It's hard to believe how fast time has gone
11
by.
years, 6 months, but it's, no.
And by most accounts, your court is a collegial one. And we talked a little bit about that earlier today. Chief Judge Stewart spoke about collegiality, how important it is to the work of the court. And some of it, of course, is personality driven, and you alluded to some courts in the past and in the slide presentation. But how do you encourage collegiality? How important is it to the work of the court? And are there little things you do to help foster that at the Supreme Court?
It is critically important. I mean, you think about it, just pick 9 people at random, throw yourselves together, and say for the next 20 years, you're going to decide some of the most important issues that are going to face the country, and, go ahead and do it. You immediately realize that you've got to find a way to get along. Otherwise, it's going to be a long 20 years, or however long. It by and large, there's certainly been episodes in the past where it hasn't worked. I mean, the controversy between Hugo Black and Robert Jackson was extraordinary. They're literally writing op-eds in the newspaper against each other. So it doesn't necessarily always work out. But there are some great customs that have developed. Chief Justice Melville Fuller, his name may not be recognized by everybody, which is it's interesting about, it's humbling for me to go to our 2 conference rooms where you have the first 8 Chief Justices in one and the last 8 in another, and walk around and look at them and realize how anonymous most of them are. I bet the most dedicated student of the court would have trouble picking out John Rutledge, Oliver Ellsworth, Morrison Waite. I've had, whenever there are gatherings in the East Conference room, I've pointed to Morrison Waite's portrait and asked people to identify them. And I've never had a gathering where anybody could. And yet he was Chief Justice for, I think, more than a dozen years. Anyway, that's a bit of a detour, but Melville Fuller instituted the practice before we go on the bench of each justice shaking hands with the others. It may seem like a little thing, but I can tell you it is a powerful representation of how kind of we're all in this together. And particularly if the day before you've really had a great deal of tension for whatever reason between 2 justices, it's not only good for them to look each other in the eye and shake hands, but it's also good for the rest of us. It's interesting, I feel a little bit more responsibility to promote collegiality than perhaps some of my colleagues do. I think we all do, but to some extent it's part of the job, I think, to make sure people are getting along. Sometimes it involves talking to them. Sometimes it involves editing. You finally get down to a draft and the dissent is saying pretty harsh things. Now, as you all know, some of those harsh things see the light of day, but you should see some that didn't. And that's when, you sort of represent the court in talking to one of your colleagues and saying, we understand you think this is important and you understand that you think it's wrong, but this particular adjective is not the one to use. I will say that occasions on which I've had to do that, I've never had a colleague say, no, that's what I'm going to say. Now, that means I obviously have to be very careful in selecting when I think that's important. I try, even in assignments, I get to assign majority opinions when I'm in the majority, and I frankly try a little bit to be sensitive to those sorts of concerns at that time. If in one opinion, Justice A and Justice B have had a real knockdown, drag-out fight, And then the next opinion, the same thing. They're on opposite sides and they're fighting. I try to find in the next assignment opinions for each of them where they agree with each other. So at least for a brief period, they're not at each other's throats. And, you know, we do develop friendships that help maintain the collegiality. If you think about it, it's kind of interesting. There aren't many jobs where you do the exact same thing as somebody else. Even if you're, you know, in sales, you probably got different parts of the country you're responsible for, or different customers. We do exactly the same thing. We have the same responsibility for deciding the same cases. We read the same briefs. We read the same precedents. We go to the same arguments. We try to fulfill the same oath. And that does give you a very special bond. You know, and when you go through things that are quite literally matters of life and death, that also gives you a strong bond that helps carry over, you know, over some of the rockier periods.
And you dine together?
Every day that we're in session or have a conference, which is about half the days every month, we go to the Justices' dining room and eat lunch together. I have one rule that I enforce strictly, is that there's no discussion of business. And they're a very interesting bunch of individuals. They have diverse interests. Justice Ginsburg will talk to you about the latest opera development. She sometimes assumes a familiarity with the subject that's not justified. Justice Alito will talk about, you know, his Philadelphia Phillies and on and on. And again, that does give you a certain common ground of humanity that helps, you know, get you through the tougher times.
I read where Chief Justice Marshall had an affinity for wine at his luncheons or with his justices. He had a tradition of that. And do you have a similar one at the court?
Bourbon. You know, it's like
they became so fond of it that, so I read, that they decided not to have wine every day, but only when it was raining. And then it...
John Marshall.
Yes.
Oh, see,
yeah,
I was wondering what you were talking about.
Oh, well, yeah, I should have...
Justice Marshall. I said, Thurgood didn't drink.
No, this was
well,
Chief Justice
yes,
Marshall.
Good, I'm glad we cleared that up. Yes, he insisted that, and he had more control to promote collegiality than I do. He insisted that all of the justices live in the same boarding house. Remember, they were riding circuit quite a bit, so they didn't have residences there. And he would serve dinner every night, and at the time, the drink of choice was Madeira. And he would serve Madeira, but as you say, only for medicinal purposes when the weather was bad. So he used to send Joseph Story, the junior justice, to the window and ask him what the weather was like. And Story sometimes would come back and say, well, it's a beautiful day. And Marshall would say, but we have national jurisdiction. It's raining somewhere. Break out the Madeira. He was...
that was the story I was fishing for.
He was the largest individual importer of Madeira in North America.
Chief, you clerked for Justice Rehnquist in the 1980s, and I'm sure that was a formative experience for you. What are the differences you see today at the court from the time of your clerkship to the current court and its workload and the comparisons you make?
In many ways, it's the same. I mean, the same process is filed, the same schedule is filed. But in one way, it's different, that we will decide about 75 cases this year. When I was a law clerk in 1980, the court decided 150. So we're half the number, and that changes things. You have a little more time to deal with the cases, and no one really knows why. I mean, a lot of academicians have tried to figure it out. There's a little bit. The Congress abolished our mandatory jurisdiction over some cases, but you know that only accounted for about 15 or so. Some people say it's been a while since Congress passed sort of the big pieces of legislation that generate a lot of litigation. I think that's changing now with, Dodd-Frank, Obamacare, all these others. There'll be a lot of cases coming out of those. Some people say it had to do with the interaction between the justices, that they became a little more cautious about taking cases. Some people even say it had to do with technology, that nowadays every court knows what every other court is doing. Back then, you could have lawyers and judges deciding an issue and not even knowing that, well, the Vermont Supreme Court had decided that the other way, a few months ago. That doesn't happen now. So I don't know why, but that's one big change, that it's a lot, the docket is a lot smaller. There are changes that come along with changes in the Chief Justices. Chief Justice Warren Burger had a very extended conferences. You'd spend during the conference, maybe an hour or so, 2 hours on, a very straightforward case. Chief Justice Rehnquist changed that. He was more, let's get this done. Discussion would be much more, much briefer. I gather, I didn't participate in either of those, of course, but I gather that conferences now are kind of what I like to think is a happy medium. We don't spend as much time as Warren Burger did, and we're not as curt as Chief Justice Rehnquist is. But those sorts of things necessarily changed with the personnel.
Do you see a difference in the opinions, given there are fewer opinions coming out of the court, fewer oral arguments by comparison to the 80s? Are there more dissenting opinions, more concurring opinions than in those years? Are the opinions maybe more tightly written?
I don't know. Again, I'm sure there are academic studies that will prove whether there are more dissents or, proportionately. But I am confident that it's harder to quantify. The opinions are, I think tighter is the right word. Because frankly, you can't imagine what June was like before trying to get out of there by the end of June when you've got a calendar with 150 cases. You almost didn't have time to read the circulations as they were going around. It was much easier just to say, well, this is what I think, and see where that fits in with what your majority says. Just attach it as a concurrence or a dissent. And now I think we have a little bit more time so that a disagreement that might have led to a separate concurring opinion can be sorted out. The sort of loose ends that might be there can be focused on and tied up. Anyway, I certainly hope so.
You strive for unanimity coming out of the court. I know you've spoken about that in the past. How important is it, and are you pleased with the progress you're making in that regard with the court?
Well, I don't want to exaggerate the significance of it, but I think not only lawyers and judges, but common lay people would think, okay, if you have 9 justices, they say the law means this, that's what it means. You get a case where, okay, here, 4 justices in the plurality, 2 justices in one concurrence, another in one concurrence, 2 in one dissent, another in dissent, and you sit there and, okay, this is what the law is. Practicing lawyers know that can be a real problem, and even a layperson is going to say, well, you obviously have some difficulty telling yourselves what the law is. So I think it's good if we can work toward unanimity. May be too ambitious a goal, although most people don't realize about half our cases are decided unanimously. But I do think it's worth spending a little bit more time to see if there is a core of agreement that people can sign off on. I think that not only because it results in a clear exposition of the law, but it also does so typically by narrowing the ground of decision. If you have, you want to write a real bold opinion, well, that's fine, but there's some people who may not be willing to go that far and they'll write separately. If you narrow the opinion in a way so that everybody can agree on it, I think that's not only good for explaining what the law is, but I think that's how the judicial process should work. You don't want to just write some broad essay. You want to decide the particular case before you. Brown versus Board of Education is a very good example of that. I suspect most people here don't know how long the decision in Brown versus Board of Education was. I think it was about 9 pages. It certainly was less than 10.
Wow.
This is the landmark decision, probably one of the most important after Marbury versus Madison. And there were a lot of reasons for that. Earl Warren wanted a unanimous opinion. This was an important case. It had to have the force of this is what the law is, no confusion. And I think he knew that if he had one more page, people were going to say, now, wait a minute, you know, I'm not willing to go that far or that. And so he, you know, with hard work, got it down to everybody can agree on these basic principles. He also wanted, it was a benefit, he wanted people to read it. You get a 50-page opinion, people are going to read the summary in the New York Times or the Washington Post. He wanted to make it impossible for those newspapers to condense it with whatever particular slant they wanted on it. And you go back, you look at the Times and the Post, there it is, all 10 pages. You wouldn't find all 50 pages. Now, those are great benefits, but there's a price to be paid. And in that case, it was, you know, a very difficult generation trying to sort out, okay, they said this, and what does that mean for this? What does that mean for this? What does that mean for de facto segregation but not de jure segregation? What does it mean out these other contexts? Okay, you kind of focus that on public education. Well, what does it mean for, you know, different public accommodation cases, all these other things? So you pay a price when you narrow the decision. And I think, you know, I think he made the correct decision to pay that price by having the, you know, clear decision that would be broadly accepted.
You were a great advocate before the Supreme Court as a member of the bar and in the SG's office. And one of the differences, I think, in the last 30 years has been a specialization of practitioners who appear before the court. You were among the first who really specialized in it and became known for it. It is a bit of a growing bar within our region. Do you think that's a good idea? Is it helpful for the court to hear from those who have practiced before, or are there downsides to it?
There's a lot of good to it, but there are drawbacks. What's good about it is that arguing before the Supreme Court is very different from arguing even before a court of appeals. The principles are different. We're not as bound by stare decisis. We're a lot less interested. We know what we said in prior cases. We don't want you to start and tell us that. We know what the facts are from our study. We don't want you to tell us that. We're going to focus on the consequences of particular rules, a lot of hypotheticals to sort of see how far to push somebody. People who haven't been there before, and I encourage you all to do so when you're in Washington. It's the best show in town. You don't need to know anything about the case or just go there. It's because the dynamic is amazing. You've got 9 justices normally, badgering lawyers with questions. I mean, part of my job, I have to referee, talk about collegiality. I have to referee the people asking questions all over the place on different topics. And you need a lawyer who is familiar with that and can handle that. The expert bar we have, you understand that. They know what the case is going to be like. They know what the process is going to be like. They have a good idea what the justices, their level of familiarity, and they can handle that. And the same thing in the briefing. They're expert in what that is like. The downside, some of us are a little wistful about it. You like the idea of, Mr. Smith goes to the court, the sole practitioner with the battered briefcase who comes in and does a great job. And, we do get that every now and then. But it's hard, given the level that the court of the advocacy has developed.
Yes.
It's hard to tell a sole practitioner, okay, why don't you take the next 3 months off, work on this case, and then come up to the Supreme Court. So it's certainly a great benefit. We do miss that occasional drama.
You mentioned having 8 justices. How did you adjust to having 8 justices after Justice Scalia's passing?
We obviously, I think, tried to talk about cases a little more in conference if it looked like we were going to be evenly divided. Tried maybe a little harder to find some common ground that could allow us to reach a particular decision. Things like that.
Good. Yeah. Well, we have a very diverse audience here today, and as we conclude this portion of the program, I wanted to acknowledge the students who are here and our judges, of course, who are here, and practitioners who are here. And for the students who are present, Chief, and I know you met with a group earlier, and I heard that went very, very well. Do you have any observations or advice about careers you might give to them? And I would throw into that question, we've heard the federal government take a lot of hits lately publicly. Do you still feel federal government service is a noble calling? And what might you say to our students who are present today?
Well, I mentioned this to I think it was about 25 or so students I met with. They apparently participated in a lottery. And I asked, well, did you win or lose? People go to law school for a lot of different reasons. They did when I was making the decision to go to law school. I think they did today as well. I think it's a tough business these days. No matter what line of work you want to go into, it's not as easy as it was when I was coming out of law school. And by easy, I don't mean the work. I mean, you know, if you did well in law school, you could be pretty well assured that you're going to get a job somewhere in the law, and you could make a career of it. It's a little tighter now. There are a lot of lawyers who are unhappy, I think is the best way to put it. And they're unhappy, I think, because they're not doing what they went to law school to do. And that may be for a lot of reasons. And the only advice I gave the students, if you don't want to be unhappy, try to keep in mind why you wanted to go to law school in the first place. If you wanted to be, you know, a trial lawyer because you like legal dramas or whatever, and you think that's something I want to do, well, don't go be a tax lawyer when you get out of law school.
Right.
Because you're going to find you're a lawyer, but it's not what you want to do. You're going to be unhappy because you're going to have to work hard no matter what you do. Now, I understand that there are different, demands on people, and you can't always just say, I want to do this. But if you have to be a tax lawyer to pay the rent, try to keep in mind, what it is you want it to do. And maybe, you have an opportunity to do pro bono work in that area or whatever. If you went to law school because you thought the law was a good way to promote, you wanted to be an environmental lawyer, and you thought that was a good way to promote something you believe in, well, keep that in mind. And when you're sitting there, at midnight doing discovery or something for a corporate merger, remind yourself why you went there and try to keep yourself open for opportunities to do that.
You mentioned the Rules Committee earlier and its important work, your leadership in streamlining litigation.
That's right. If you went to law school to work on a Rules Committee, make sure.
No, but I
make sure you do that, Carl. There you go. It worked.
but making the courts more accessible, making litigation maybe less burdensome. I think your leadership in making the practice of law more attractive than maybe it has been in the last few years is much appreciated, I think, both among practitioners and certainly the courts. So.
Well, I know Carl and Jeremy and the professor had a panel on courage in a judge, but it's something you need as a lawyer as well. And in a concrete way, just the things we're talking about, you need to take the students, the young lawyers, sort of control over your own professional development. And sometimes that requires the courage when, a senior partner, whatever, tells you this, you're going to work the fourth weekend in a row, and that means you don't have the time to do some of the things you wanted to do. You have to have the courage to say, no, I've got whatever else. You don't say it the first time, or maybe not even the second, but sooner or later, you have to realize, and, I've been in a firm environment, that the senior partners will be happy to, take advantage of your abilities and drive as long as they can. And the reality is it takes courage to say, no, I have other things to do. But the interesting thing is that I think that senior lawyer will actually admire you for it, appreciate that he wants to spend time doing other things as well. And as I said, admire your courage in sort of standing up for yourself. And that may allow you the opportunity to do some things that are closer to what you had in mind when you went to law school.
That's great. Yeah. Your year-end report, we mentioned, focused on district judges. You care to spread the love with our magistrate judges, bankruptcy judges, appellate judges who are present today?
I think everybody deserves recognition. But no, it's an important point. For example, the bankruptcy judges go through different periods depending upon bankruptcies, but there are many, many periods where they're very overworked, and the demands on the bankruptcy judges are extraordinary. They basically take every type of case that you can imagine and crunch it into a single proceeding. You know, you have a claim, I have a claim, the lawsuit against you for tort. I have a claim against you for this debt, and all these claims are there, and they've got to decide them, and they can't drag it out because the bankruptcy, they need to resolve it. So they have to be very quick and sort of know lots of everything. Magistrate judges, are kind of the unsung heroes because they handle a lot of the work, whether it's, warrants, discovery, all sorts of things that help shape the presentation of the case for other judges, or in many cases resolve it themselves. In the Court of Appeals judges, it's very interesting. It's the workload varies so dramatically from case to case. I was out in Montana visiting with some judges out there, and the big thing that a lot of people lament these days is the lack of trials, the fact that you don't get argument time when you're arguing appeals. And one of the judges said to me, well, I've got 5 trials next week, and there's the train, hit a cow and all this kind of stuff. It's a different type of docket, but he had trials, and they had everybody who wanted an argument, they could get an argument. Very different if you're in the Southern District of New York and moving. So there's a tremendous variety when it comes to the Courts of Appeals experience.
Yes. Well, Mr. Chief Justice, I do want to thank you very, very much for your time today. And if I could take just a personal note as we conclude. About a little over 45 years ago, I started at this university, and a couple doors down the way here at Memorial Hall, there was a history course that had been offered, and I signed up as a freshman, and Professor Robert Ireland was the history professor there. He's here today, I believe, and he was such an inspiration to me to take an interest in the law and history and constitutional law in particular, and I wanted to express my thanks to him, but I also wanted to do it in this context. I think your presence here today is so meaningful, and it's very much a part of what we're trying to do with the Heyburn Initiative, is to inspire people to go into the law and the practice and to help us build a better court system. And the fact that you're here today, it's hard for me to believe that 45 years later, after taking this course just next door, that I'm here with the Chief Justice of the United States at the University of Kentucky. And it's just a very special day for everybody here in this community and for the judiciary as a whole. We thank you, Chief.
Oh, delighted to do it. Delighted. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
You bet.